The studio lights cast a warm glow over the sleek set where two leather chairs sat angled toward each other. Representative Jasmine Crockett, her posture poised yet relaxed, glanced at her notes one last time. Across from her, Senator Ted Cruz adjusted his cufflinks, offering a quick nod as their eyes met. "Congresswoman," Cruz said, his Texas drawl softened by a smile, "I appreciate you taking the time for this. I know you're juggling a lot in D.C. Crockett returned the smile, her expression warm but guarded. "Senator, I'll be honest, I didn't expect the network to pair us for this one. But I'm intrigued," Cruz chuckled. "That makes two of us. When they pitched a special on faith and values, I wasn't sure what to expect. But I'm looking forward to it. 30 seconds, the floor director called, her voice cutting through the hum of the crew. As they settled into their chairs, Cruz leaned slightly toward Crockett. "Just so you know, I'm not here to turn this into a political slugfest. Tonight's about something bigger." Crockett nodded, her eyes narrowing with curiosity. "Agreed. Let's keep it real. 5, 4. The floor director's fingers counted down the final beats silently. The camera's red light blinked on, and they were live to millions of viewers across the country. "Good evening, and welcome to Faith and Future," the host, Rebecca Chen, began, her voice steady and inviting. "Tonight, we bring you a unique conversation between two influential voices who rarely share the same stage. Senator Ted Cruz, a longtime figure in conservative politics, and Representative Jasmine Crockett, a rising star in Congress known for her sharp advocacy and legal background. They'll be discussing faith, values, and the future of our society. After a brief introduction, I'll step aside and they'll guide the conversation wherever it leads. Senator, Congresswoman, you have the floor." As Rebecca slipped off camera, Cruz turned to Crockett, his demeanor open. "Thank you for being here, Jasmine. Most folks know us through our work in Congress, but tonight's about something more personal. I've spoken often about my Christian faith, but you've been more private about spiritual matters. Would you be willing to share your perspective on faith?" Crockett shifted slightly, her fingers brushing the edge of her chair. "That's a big question to start with, Senator," she said, her tone light but thoughtful. "Faith is personal, and in today's climate, talking about it publicly can feel like stepping into a minefield. People are quick to judge or twist your words." Cruz nodded, his expression empathetic. "I hear you. It's not easy to open up when every word can be spun into something else." "Exactly," Crockett continued, her voice gaining confidence. "But I've come to believe that some things are too important to stay silent about, even if it risks misunderstanding. Faith is one of them." Cruz leaned forward, his interest genuine. "What's brought you to that point?" Crockett took a deep breath, her eyes briefly scanning the studio before settling on Cruz. "For most of my life, I've tackled problems head-on, through law, through advocacy, through policy. If you can argue it, you can win it. If you can prove it, you can change it. That's been my mindset." "A fighter's approach," Cruz said, nodding. "It's served you well." "It has," Crockett agreed. "But it's not enough on its own. There are questions that logic and argument can't fully resolve. Questions about purpose, about why we're here, about how we hold on to hope when the world feels so broken. Those questions have led me to lean more intentionally into my faith." Cruz's eyebrows lifted slightly. "That's powerful. Where has that journey taken you?" "To places I didn't expect," Crockett said, a small smile breaking through. "Including a deeper engagement with Jesus Christ and what his life and teachings mean. Not just for me personally, but for how I show up in the world." The camera zoomed in subtly, capturing the flicker of surprise on Cruz's face. "That's not what most folks might expect from a congresswoman known for her fiery floor speeches," he said, his tone respectful. Crockett laughed softly. "I know, right? And that's why I think this conversation matters. People put us in boxes: politician, lawyer, activist, but faith doesn't fit neatly into those labels." The studio grew quiet, the crew hanging on her words. This was already shaping up to be more than the standard talking head segment they'd anticipated. "What about Jesus' teachings caught your attention?" Cruz asked, setting aside his prepared notes. "The way they challenge everything we take for granted," Crockett replied without hesitation. "Take the Beatitudes. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the peacemakers. That's not just poetry. It's a radical reordering of what society values. We're taught to chase power, status, victory. Jesus flips that upside down and says true strength is in humility, in compassion, in standing for justice even when it costs you." Cruz nodded enthusiastically. "The upside-down kingdom, as some theologians call it." "Exactly," Crockett said, her voice animated. "And what's wild is how relevant that message still is. 2,000 years later, we're still obsessed with winning, with being the loudest voice in the room. Jesus calls us to something different, a life rooted in love and sacrifice." "When did you start wrestling with these ideas on a deeper level?" Cruz asked. Crockett paused, her expression softening. "About a year and a half ago, during a particularly tough moment in Congress. I was burned out, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. You know how DC can be. Endless debates, constant noise, and way too much posturing. One night, I was back in my apartment, scrolling through social media, reading all these comments, some supportive, some vicious, and I just felt empty. Like, what's the point of all this if it's just a cycle of fighting and division?" Cruz listened intently, his usual guarded demeanor giving way to genuine curiosity. "That night," Crockett continued, "I remembered something my grandmother used to say when I was growing up in Dallas. She'd quote Jesus, 'What good is it to gain the whole world, but lose your soul?' Those words hit me like a ton of bricks. I'd been climbing, achieving, succeeding by every external measure. But something was missing." The camera caught Cruz's eyes, softening. "That's a moment of reckoning," he said quietly. "It was," Crockett nodded. "The next morning I pulled out my old Bible, the one my grandmother gave me when I graduated high school. It had been sitting on a shelf, collecting dust. I started reading the Gospel of Luke, no agenda, just wanting to understand. And I found myself drawn to Jesus in a way I hadn't been before." "What stood out to you?" Cruz asked. "His humanity and his clarity," Crockett replied. "This wasn't the soft pastel Jesus from Sunday school art. This was a man who called out hypocrisy, who stood with the marginalized, who spoke truth with an authority that demanded a response. In Luke, when he reads from Isaiah in the synagogue, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, to proclaim good news to the poor, liberty to the captives," that wasn't just a mission statement. It was a challenge to everyone listening, then and now. Cruz nodded slowly. "That passage has always struck me as a call to action. Jesus doesn't let you stay neutral." "Not at all," Crockett agreed. "You either lean in or you walk away." And I realized I'd been sitting on the sidelines for too long, treating faith like a cultural checkbox instead of something that could reshape how I live and lead. The studio air felt charged, the crew exchanging glances. This was no rehearsed exchange. It was raw, unguarded, and riveting. "You mentioned Luke," Cruz said. "Was there a specific story or teaching that hit home for you?" "The parable of the Good Samaritan," Crockett answered without hesitation. "It's so simple but so profound. A man's beaten, left for dead, and the respectable people pass him by. Then this Samaritan, a total outsider, someone despised by the religious elite, stops, cares for him, pays for his recovery. Jesus tells that story to answer, 'Who is my neighbor?' and basically says, 'Everyone is your neighbor, no exceptions.'" Cruz leaned back impressed. "That story cuts through every division, race, class, religion." "Exactly," Crockett said, her voice rising with passion. "And it's a gut check for those of us in public life. How often do we walk past the people who need us most because it's inconvenient or doesn't fit our agenda? Jesus calls us to stop, to see, to act with compassion, even when it's messy. That's not an easy standard, Cruz acknowledged. No, it's not, Crockett said, her tone softening. Which is why another teaching has been sitting heavy on me. Jesus' words about forgiveness. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. That one's tough, especially in politics, where grudges are currency. Cruz's eyes widened slightly. You're speaking my language now. Forgiveness is countercultural in D.C. It's countercultural. Everywhere, Crockett said with a wry smile. But especially when you're in the public eye, and every misstep is magnified. I've had to learn to forgive, not just others, but myself. To let go of the anger, the need to clap back, the weight of carrying every slight. Cruz dabbed at his eyes with a tissue, a rare moment of vulnerability for the seasoned senator. That's powerful, Jasmine. Have you found that forgiveness changes how you approach your work? It's starting to, Crockett replied. There was a moment last year during a heated committee hearing. I was ready to go full lawyer mode, tear into an opponent. But mid-debate, I felt this quiet nudge, call it the spirit, call it conscience, reminding me of Jesus' words, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you. I didn't change my stance, but I changed my tone. I spoke with conviction, but not venom. And you know what? The room shifted. People listened differently. Cruz nodded, clearly moved. That's what faith does. It transforms not just you, but the space around you. The conversation flowed. Effortlessly, the initial wariness between Crockett and Cruz giving way to a shared sense of purpose. The crew stood unusually still, captivated by the authenticity unfolding before them. Congresswoman, Cruz said, you've talked about engaging with Scripture. Has that led you to any practices like prayer that have shaped your journey? Crockett smiled, a touch of self-consciousness in her expression. Prayer's been a game changer, though I'll admit it felt awkward at first. I'm a doer. Give me a problem. I'll strategize a solution. Prayer felt like talking to the air. But over time, it's become a lifeline. It's where I bring the exhaustion, the doubts, the hopes I don't share publicly. What's that been like for you? Cruz asked gently. It's grounding, Crockett said. There's a verse in Philippians, do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. That's become my anchor. When I'm overwhelmed by the noise of Congress or the weight of representing my district, prayer reminds me I'm not carrying it alone. Cruz's eyes glistened again. That's beautiful. It's rare to hear someone in our line of work articulate that so clearly. I don't have it all figured out, Crockett clarified. I'm still learning, still wrestling. Faith isn't a destination, it's a journey. But it's given me a framework to keep going, to stay rooted in something bigger than myself. The camera captured the quiet intensity of the moment, the unspoken connection between two people from opposite sides of the political spectrum. Jasmine, Cruz said, his voice thick with emotion. What's the hardest part of living out your faith in public life? Crockett exhaled, her expression thoughtful. Staying true to it when the world rewards the opposite. Jesus says, blessed are the merciful, but politics often demands ruthlessness. He says, seek first the kingdom of God, but the system pushes you to seek approval, votes, headlines. The challenge is holding fast to what's eternal when everything around you feels urgent and temporary. Cruz nodded slowly. That's the tension we all face, isn't it? And yet, those eternal truths are what give us hope. They do, Crockett agreed. And they remind me why I'm here. Not just to win arguments, but to serve, to lift up the forgotten, to point toward something better. The studio remained hushed, the weight of their words lingering. Cruz reached for another tissue, no longer hiding his emotion. "I didn't expect to be this moved," he admitted. "But hearing you talk about faith with such conviction, it's a reminder of why this matters." Crockett smiled, her eyes warm. "Maybe that's why we're here, Senator. To remind each other, and maybe a few folks watching, that faith isn't just personal. It's a call to show up differently in the world." The studio lights seemed to soften as the conversation between Representative Jasmine Crockett and Senator Ted Cruz reached its final moments. The crew, usually restless by this point in a broadcast, remained riveted, their usual bustle replaced by a reverent stillness. The cameras captured every nuance, the warmth in Crockett's eyes, the unguarded emotion on Cruz's face, as two public figures, often defined by their political battles, found common ground in something deeper. Cruz leaned forward, his voice steady but thick with feeling. "Jasmine, you've shared so much about how faith has reshaped your perspective. I'm curious, how has it changed the way you see your role in Congress, especially in these divisive times?" Crockett's expression grew thoughtful, her fingers tracing the edge of her chair. "It's made me rethink what success looks like," she said. "When I first got to D.C., I thought it was about winning debates, passing bills, getting my name in the headlines. And don't get me wrong, those things matter. But faith has shown me that real impact isn't just about policy, wins. It's about how you treat people, how you listen, how you fight for justice without losing your own humanity." Cruz nodded, his eyes glistening. "That's a perspective we don't hear enough in politics." "It's hard to hold on to," Crockett admitted. "The system doesn't reward humility or patience. But I keep coming back to Jesus' example, how he led with love, even when he was challenging the powerful. There's a verse in Micah that's been guiding me. Act justly, love mercy, walk humbly with your God. That's my North Star now, even when the noise of Congress tries to pull me off course." The camera zoomed in slightly, catching the quiet intensity in her voice. Cruz dabbed at his eyes again, no longer attempting to hide his emotion. "That's profound," he said. "And it's a reminder that faith isn't just about personal salvation. It's about how we shape the world around us." "Absolutely," Crockett said, her voice rising with conviction. "Jesus didn't just talk about love, he lived it. He didn't just preach justice. He stood with the outcast, the overlooked. That's what I'm trying to carry into my work. Not to be perfect, but to be faithful. To show up for my constituents, especially those who feel forgotten, and to remind them that they're seen, they're valued." Cruz smiled, a rare moment of unguarded warmth. "You're preaching now, Congresswoman." Crockett laughed, the sound lightening the room. "I learned from the best, my grandmother's church in Dallas. But seriously, Senator, faith has given me a why behind the what. It's not just about passing laws, it's about building a society where people can thrive, where we see each other as neighbors, not enemies." The studio fell silent again, the weight of her words settling over the space. Cruz took a deep breath, his voice softer now. "You know, one of the most transformative parts of my own faith has been the concept of grace. Undeserved forgiveness, second chances. In politics, we're trained to keep score, to never let a slight go unanswered. But Jesus offers a different way." Crockett nodded, her expression softening. "Grace is revolutionary. It's what lets us move forward, even after we've messed up. I've had moments, plenty of them, where I've said the wrong thing, reacted out of anger, or let pride get in the way. The world doesn't forgive easily, but grace does. It says, 'You're not defined by your worst moment.' That's freed me to keep going, to try again." "Have you felt that freedom in your public life?" Cruz asked, his tone gentle. "More and more," Crockett replied. "There was a time early in my term when I got dragged online for a comment I made during a debate. It was a misstep, and the pile-on was brutal. I was ready to double down, defend myself to the hilt. But then I remembered Jesus' words, 'Blessed are the peacemakers.' I prayed about it, And instead of clapping back, I issued an apology, not because I was weak, but because I wanted to model something different. And you know what? Some of the loudest critics reached out privately, and we had real conversations. Grace opened a door that pride would have slammed shut. Cruz's eyes widened slightly, clearly impressed. That takes courage. Most of us would have fought back. Trust me, I wanted to, Crockett said with a wry smile. But faith is teaching me to pick my battles. Not every hill is worth dying on. Sometimes the real win is showing people there's another way. The camera caught the moment of connection between them. Two people from opposite political worlds united by a shared conviction. The floor director signaled that time was running low, but neither seemed eager to rush. The moment. Jasmine, Cruz said, his voice earnest. Has exploring faith publicly come with any pushback? In some circles, especially in progressive spaces, Christianity can be seen as out of step with modern values. Crockett tilted her head, considering the question. Oh, there's pushback. Some folks assume faith means you're checking your intellect at the door or signing up for a rigid set of rules. Others think it's a betrayal of progressive ideals, like you can't be for justice and Jesus at the same time. My response? They're wrong about both. Cruz chuckled. Tell me more. Faith and reason aren't enemies, Crockett said, her voice firm. The Bible calls us to love God with our heart, soul, and mind. And if you look at history, Christians have been at the forefront of justice movements, abolition, civil rights, women's suffrage. My faith doesn't pull me away from fighting for equality. It fuels it. Jesus was a disruptor, calling out systems that oppressed the vulnerable. I'm just trying to follow his lead. That's a perspective more people need to hear, Cruz said, nodding. What about the idea that faith is anti-intellectual? Crockett smiled. That's a stereotype, not reality. Faith asks the big questions. Why do we exist? What's the source of human dignity? How do we live well together? Those aren't lightweight issues. Engaging with scripture, wrestling with theology. It's as intellectually rigorous as any legal brief I've ever written. And it's grounded me in a way that nothing else has. The studio clock ticked closer to the end, but the conversation felt timeless. Cruz leaned forward, his voice almost a whisper. One last question, Jasmine. What's the biggest lesson faith has taught you so far? Crockett paused, her eyes distant for a moment. That I'm enough. Not because of what I do or achieve, but because of who God says I am. In a world that measures your worth by likes, votes, or titles, that's a radical truth. It's given me the freedom to serve without fear, to speak truth without needing everyone's approval, to rest in the knowledge that I'm loved, flaws and all. Cruz reached for another tissue, his voice unsteady. I'm sorry, he said, a faint smile breaking through. I didn't expect to be this moved on live television. Crockett's eyes softened. Neither did I, Senator. But maybe that's the point. Faith has a way of breaking through our defenses, showing us what really matters. The camera pulled back, capturing the two of them in a moment of quiet solidarity. Rebecca Chen stepped back into frame, her own eyes glistening. Senator Cruz, Congresswoman Crockett, thank you for this extraordinary conversation. You've given us all a lot to reflect on. To our viewers, we hope this has been as meaningful for you as it has been for us in the studio. Good night. As the red light on the camera blinked off, the crew erupted into applause, a rare break from protocol. Crockett and Cruz exchanged a look, both smiling, as if surprised by the depth of what had just unfolded. They stood, shaking hands, and for a moment, the political labels that defined them fell away. What remained was a shared humanity, a shared faith, and a shared hope that their words might ripple outward, touching lives far beyond the studio walls.